Hello, everybody. I'm Shauna McCartyho. I'm a Director of Action Sustainability in the UK, and I'm also Chair of the Supply Chain Sustainability School. I'm here talking to you virtually today, although I've worked with our friends in the Czech Republic many times in the past and really do hope to be able to return to work with you again in person in the future. I've been asked to speak at this virtual conference about the issue of social value in procurement. How do we define it? How do we deliver it? What are some of the issues and challenges that we faced in the UK over the years, where we can maybe share some of our experience with you? So first of all, what is the scope of social value? What do we mean when we talk about social value? Well, over the years, we now have better definitions, thankfully, thanks to the UK Sustainable Development Goals, which sum things up very well. Not all organisations, of course, can deliver on all 17 Sustainable Development Goals, but we can prioritise and we can understand how we can deliver against most of them. You will doubtless be familiar as well with the Venn diagram that we see below that, the social, economic and environmental sustainability that came out of the Brundtland report in 1987. So this is not new. In the UK, we've gone several steps further. We now have a Public Services Social Value Act, which requires public sector organisations to have regard to economic, social and environmental well-being in connection with public services and their procurement. We have a working definition here for social value. Social value refers to the total impact on people's quality of life. And hold that thought. That's a really important concept to think about, because there are many different ways of interpreting social value, many of them very robust, some less so. It's really important to understand, has what we do had an effect on people and on their lives, because that's what we're trying to do. And the concept of social value and economic value are often mixed, and we need to think very carefully about that. As I said at the beginning, I chair the Supply Chain Sustainability School. The school now has over 100 partners involved in collaboration in the UK construction industry. And the great thing is then we can actually poll those partners, we can ask them questions, we can take views on how they're dealing with some of these issues. And we did so. We asked our partners what they think about some of these issues. Firstly, why are they interested in social value at all? What's driving them to do it? Interestingly, improving relationships with their stakeholders and satisfying client expectations were kind of obvious ones. If there's a social value act, if public procurers are asking their supply chains to deliver social value, then of course they're going to be interested because their clients are asking for it. But the top answer was to attract and retain staff. Businesses are starting to recognise now in the UK and in other parts of the world that people get this agenda, particularly younger people. And if you want good and talented people in your organisations, then it's really necessary to take note of some of these requirements and these issues. Slightly lower down, managing corporate reputation was an important factor. Investor expectations scored relatively low, but actually they're getting much higher now. And institutional investors are very material to the whole issue of driving the private sector towards greater social value and towards addressing climate change. Client requirements are articulated in a variety of different ways. There are some examples on this slide. Social value requirements in project specifications, so in placemaking, the way that we define buildings, the way that we want them to be in terms of how they interact with people in the community. Inclusion of social value questions in invitations to tender. That's more and more prevalent now in the UK, and we'll talk about that later. And in some cases, simply defining minimum standards. So the government in Wales Wales now has a code of practice for ethical employment in supply chains. And that's the requirement. They will not do business with you unless you sign up to this requirement. So some of those requirements are becoming quite strong now. And then finally, social value requirements in contracts. I think that's very important. It's all very well to ask questions in a tender, but if that's not followed up with a contractual commitment, then potentially it has less value. In the UK, we also have planning requirements, planning consent requirements known as Section 106 in the UK. Planners often require social value as part of the planning permission to create buildings or to create infrastructure in the local authority area. So that's another aspect that drives social value through the supply chain. Board shareholder investment expectations are getting stronger and stronger. And you'll see from this slide, there are many, many ways in which we can deliver social value. The list on there is not exhaustive. There are a whole variety of different ways. So what we've tried to do is to break those aspects of social value down into 5 key topics: employment, training and skills, inclusive supply chains, protecting the environment, and contributing to communities. So we asked our partners for a bit more information about those aspects. Firstly, employment. How do school partners contribute to social value through employment? The top answers, employee health and well-being. Again, I would hope a fairly obvious one. Equality and diversity, fairness, inclusion and respect was another top score amongst our partners. The UK is a very diverse community. We are 50% of our people roughly are women, but there aren't 50% women working in the construction sector, anything like. We also have a big population of ethnic minority, disabled people, etc. And those people are underrepresented in our sector. So we need to do more to get some of those people into our value chain, because if we don't, then we're not attracting the best talent. We're not going to get the best people if we're not completely inclusive in the way that we try to work with our communities in the area. Various other requirements here. Modern slavery. The UK has a Modern Slavery Act. There's no doubt that modern slavery exists in most supply chains one way or another. Fair labour conditions, supporting vulnerable and disadvantaged groups into work. So that's people from long-term unemployment, sometimes between generations unemployed, bringing those people into the workplace. We have some really good examples in the UK of organisations that work with ex-offenders, people who have served prison sentences, and getting them rehabilitated into society and into employment in a way that they're contributing to society rather than taking from it, maybe. So a variety of different ways using the employment power of the supply chain to deliver social value. Secondly, training and skills. How are our partners dealing with the skills agenda? Upskilling employees, obviously, very strongly 100% answer there. Apprenticeships are really important. In the UK, we have an ageing workforce in the construction sector and in other sectors. And there's been underinvestment for many, many years in apprenticeships and skills. So it's really important that we start to get people into the employment chain who have the skills that we need in the future. That's a critical issue for the industry. Upskilling job seekers got a relatively low answer, which I think is regrettable, because providing training to people who are currently unemployed has a great deal of value. It is taking people out of unemployment into skilled work where they can earn a good living and have a good life and contribute to society in a really good way. Supplier diversity and inclusive procurement. This is really about looking at the ownership of businesses, and it includes many things. Certainly trading with small to medium enterprises is very important. Trading with local businesses, so those businesses that are local to where the work is being carried out, contributes to the society in that business. It contributes to the well-being of people who don't necessarily have to travel or maybe stay away from their families to do work. Trading with social enterprises, so looking for businesses that have a social purpose as well as a purely financial purpose, is also important to some of our partners. Government focuses very heavily on trade with small to medium enterprises, and often we'll see in government contracts targets set for trading with small businesses. That represents its own challenges in terms of the way that we manage our procurement and at what level in the supply chain are those small businesses positioned. They're often not at tier 1, they could be at tier 2, 3, 4, and sometimes they're quite hard to understand where your value chain is going and where those small to medium enterprises are. Protecting the environment. Interestingly, managing and improving air quality was the top answer here. Air quality is an issue in our cities. It's primarily about diesel engines and nitrous oxide emissions and particulate emissions from diesels that are a risk to human health. And dealing with that both in vehicle fleets and in what we call non-road mobile machinery, so that the sort of equipment that we use on construction sites is a very important, and according to our partners, the most important factor, more than use of renewable energy, which quite surprised me really. But I think it's a question of where you can make most impact, and air quality is clearly a big issue. Water quality and water-related impacts are less popular. That's usually the case. That's quite regrettable. I don't think we maybe focus on that enough when we think about environmental protection. So the fifth aspect that we asked our partners about was contributing to communities. How do our school partners contribute to communities in order to deliver social value? And as you'll see from the slide here, there are many, many ways that our partners can contribute. I was a little bit disappointed to see that the top answer was giving to charities, because it kind of feels like just throwing some money at something without really engaging with it is maybe not the best way, in my opinion, to deliver social value. I like the second most popular answer better, involving communities. Actually getting engaged with those stakeholders that we're providing services for, that we're working in amongst, understanding their problems and understanding where we can best deliver against some of these social value objectives. Promoting social mobility has come out as quite a key issue. Improving accessibility, for instance, with disabled people or people with limited mobility, are really important. One of the disappointments for me, to an extent, was one of the lower answers, addressing loneliness and social isolation. This survey was completed before the COVID crisis. I think since COVID, we may well see a much stronger response coming back there. People are being isolated. They are being asked to stay at home. They're not seeing their families. They don't necessarily have access to outside space. In the construction industry in the UK, the rate of suicides in men over 30 is 3 times the national average. Mental health and emotional well-being are becoming more and more important aspects of certainly the construction sector, but other sectors within the UK. We need to address some of these issues in a very sensitive way. And we're doing things certainly in the supply chain school that I would never have expected to do. We're running courses on mindfulness, on meditation, really starting to get to some issues that in a traditionally male-dominated environment, we don't necessarily like talking about. So, and there are many other examples listed here. I'm not going to read them all out. I think just really to say, as organizations, you need to understand where you can best contribute and where your supply chains can best contribute to social value, because there are many, many different ways of doing it. So how do we do this through procurement? Well, the world has a standard for sustainable procurement, ISO 2400. I would commend it to you and recommend that you use it. As part of my business, we help organizations to do this. We also provide a free-to-access website through our social enterprise, ISO2400.org, with lots of really good information and case studies. The standard is very much a management system. It comes in 4 sections. The fundamentals, where we understand our drivers and our corporate values and policy. Our policy and strategy, where we set out what we require our supply chains to do at a very high level. The enablers are the organizational conditions that we need to create in order to deliver sustainable procurement. And then finally, the procurement process itself. I'm not going to talk about the ISO standard in a great deal of detail today. That's a whole other subject. But I am going to focus on how we might use some of these principles to deliver social value for our communities and for our society. Balanced scorecards, a very good way of delivering sustainable procurement or delivering a range of objectives through procurement. This is an example from the London Olympic Games. I was chair of the Independent Commission for a Sustainable London 2012, so I was deeply involved in this. This is a balanced scorecard that the Olympic Delivery Authority used, where they look at many different aspects, as you can see on the screen here, 7 different aspects of delivery, of evaluation, of contracting, and setting key performance indicators, and only one of those is cost. Typically, in an ODA tender, around about 60% of the evaluation score would be from non-cost criteria. This was particularly interesting as London won the right to host the Olympic Games in 2005, when the economy was booming, and had to deliver the Olympic Games in a recession. After the global financial crisis of 2008, the Games were eventually delivered in 2012. The purpose of the London Olympics ultimately was all about regenerating the poor East End of London. And we stayed with that purpose throughout. We had to change quite a lot of things, including major things like the financing of the Olympic Village was originally to be done by a commercial property developer, and the homes would be sold after they'd been used for athletes. The financing for that initiative fell apart in the global financial crisis, and it had to be taken into public funding. Ultimately, that was good news because the properties were still sold, and the public sector profited from that sale. But it was necessary to change the way that we do things without losing sight of that social purpose, something that London has failed to do for the last 200 years, regenerating the East End. We were not going to lose sight of that just because there happened to be a financial crisis. And it's important that I think that we did that. East London is now a thriving part of our city, and is massively improved on the conditions for people that existed before the Games. The latest thinking in the UK is something called procuring for value. This is a draft example of what they call the 5 capitals model. I think that might be reduced to 4 capitals in the future. But it's about thinking about each procurement and how you define value for that procurement. And as you can see, the chart in the middle shows an example of how you can look at emphasizing some aspects of value more than others when you go through a procurement process. So do watch this space in the new year. You'll be seeing a lot more about procuring for value from the UK public sector. Thinking then about how do we define, measure and monetize aspects of social value? Well, very important to start thinking about how we do this and what the examples are. In this case, thinking about employee volunteering for a specific scheme. Did that specific scheme relate in a difference to people? So are young people travelling with increased confidence as a result of taking part in the scheme, for example? So it's all about benefit to people, not necessarily about the inputs, i.e. some people have volunteered for a scheme of some sort. That's very nice, but it's not really social value unless that scheme is delivering some benefit to people. And that's really what we're trying to say with some of these examples that we see. So a social impact multiplied by a monetized value, you can put money against the social value to the community, can relate in a monetized social value that you can actually put some cost against. In the UK, there are various models available, and I would have to say a fair amount of confusion and misinterpretation of those models, because actually they're different and they come out with different outcomes and different assumptions. The Hacked Social Value Bank is very robust. It's a publicly available library of metrics. It covers a broad range of impacts, but it's sometimes quite difficult to track improvement using that database. There's another one called National TOMS. Don't be fooled by the term national. This is not a government initiative. It's very much a private sector initiative. They both are. National TOMS is sometimes quite difficult to really define the outcomes, and some of the measures there are based on inputs rather than outcomes. So it's quite hard to quantify in some cases. The Common Social Impact Framework for the rail sector brings all of those things together and tries to provide examples of the most robust measures that are available and what best practice looks like from the various models and from the various examples that we have. So just to run a quick example of what a good monetized value and not so good monetized value might look like. So number of hours of volunteer leave offered is not really social value. It's just something that an organization does. Number of people actually volunteering, resulting in some outcomes to those people, their well-being is improved as a result of it, is a very good, robust measure. The outcome of the volunteering itself, so the recipients of a scheme, of a social scheme, feeling more confident or benefiting from greater activity or better health, is a better scheme, and that has greater social value. So these things are in the UK embedded in something called the Treasury Green Book, where there are some very specific ways in which you can attach money to social value. So how do we collect the data? We can use this using our cloud-based software tool that I'm showing you here. Many different tools are available to do that. So we collect data against a metric. This might be, for instance, employment, say, of ex-offenders. Number of ex-offenders brought into employment for at least 6 months, by way of example. That can be converted using a financial proxy into a social value number. So if you can imagine, for instance, a previously long-term unemployed person living on benefit is now employed and paying taxes, that has a monetary value to society. So then you can develop dashboards. So you can show a very simple red, amber, green dashboard to understand how well you're doing against that social value objective. You can produce graphs. You can produce lots of visual information that helps you to understand this. Here's an example from the UK public sector. This was a big rail project, refurbishment of London Bridge Station, which was a massive project over multiple years. We can start to understand some of the benefits. So 66 people who were previously unemployed for at least 6 months had employment for at least 6 months and remained in work. That has a massive value to society, and it can be monetized, and we can understand the benefits of that. 24 recruits to the apprenticeship program, of which 14 have successfully completed their apprenticeships and are now in skilled full-time employment. It's very important to emphasize what happens as a result of these things. I've seen examples in the UK construction sector where contractors have employed apprentices because the local authority said they should, on a project that lasted only 9 months. So those people did not complete their apprenticeships and they were dismissed at the end of the project. The amount of social value would probably be negative because those people will never come back to the construction industry again. And we've lost those people forever because they were so badly treated just because a contractor wanted to satisfy the numbers that had been set out by the local authority. So do beware of unintended consequences. This is a great example from a contractor in the UK that actually shows what the contractor has invested, what they've invested into the community, and finally what the outcomes and impacts were. This is a much more graphical example of what I showed you earlier with a lot more examples that I won't go through in detail. But it's very important to think about what did you do, why did you do it, and what was the outcome, what happened as a result of what you've done. Lots more information available on the Supply Chain Sustainability School. It is all in English, sorry. We do have some content in Welsh language, but it is free to access for anybody in the world. And there's some really good high value guidance in there, designed for social value in the built environment, asset use, e-learning modules, etc. So lots more information available for you. That concludes the presentation for me. Thank you very much for listening to me. I hope to be able to take questions live at the event, but I believe that we have a couple of questions now.
Shaun, thank you very much for your presentation. If I may, I would like to ask you 2 questions. You mentioned the Social Value Act. Can you tell us about the UK experience when the Social Value Act passed the Parliament, and considering the social value became mandatory, what was the reaction of public authorities? And what made even smaller towns to implement it?
Yeah, the reaction initially was quite slow because the Social Value Acts basically told public procurers that they have to do it, but they didn't say how. So it was quite a challenge to procurement professionals and commissioners of services to understand how to do that. Initially, it was very much passed down the supply chain to the tier 1 suppliers to say, show us in your tender how you would deliver social value. And then the suppliers didn't really know either. So a lot of very variable answers started to come back. I think we're seeing a much more sophisticated approach now, where we are seeing balanced scorecards. We are seeing typically 20% of a tender evaluation is based on social value. And the procurers are asking for real outcome-based measures in many cases now. So there has been an improvement, but it's taken quite some time. It's not just because some legislation is passed doesn't mean that the world will change instantly. But it is really a thing now in organisations that primarily serve the public sector are focusing really hard on social value, and they're focusing really hard on their supply chains going further down the track. In terms of smaller authorities, they tend to interpret social value in a way that is good for their area that they're responsible for. So very much an emphasis on local issues, and that's variable. If it's a rural community in the country, then the impact on environment, habitats, those sorts of things become very important. In, say, deprived urban communities, then tackling poverty, tackling things like hunger, child welfare, those sorts of issues. Long-term unemployment tend to be big issues. So the good thing about the Act doesn't define social value. It provides some guidance on the aspects. So you, as a small local authority, you can actually focus on things that are important for your electorate and for your communities. So it is of benefit to all public procurers, not just the big ones. The large infrastructure projects tend to focus on value to the nation, whereas local authorities would focus very much on value to their communities and ultimately for the political leadership to their electorate.
Thank you. You spoke about the Olympic Games, actually about procuring in the crisis. Now all the economies suffer from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. What is the current situation in the UK in the field of public procurement? And particularly if there are expected budget restrictions, would public authorities consider minimizing the social value requirements in their tenders to push for the lowest possible prices?
So right now, I'm not seeing much of that type of behaviour. I am seeing public authorities still focusing very hard on social value through their procurement. Of course, with budget cuts, there is always a temptation to go for the lowest price. And I did see that to a degree in the 2008 financial crisis, where a lot of public and private organisations kind of put the whole sustainability agenda to one side for a while. I'm not seeing that right now. Because I think there is a recognition that after the COVID crisis, we're going to see more social problems as a result of the health impact and ultimately the economic impact of the COVID crisis. So I think public bodies would be very unwise to go back into a race to the bottom on price. There's much more to value than price, and I think there's a stronger recognition of that now than there was in 2008. That's not to say that we might see some emphasis on price coming back in the future, but I'm not seeing it yet, and I do hope that organisations start to understand that value is not just in the currency that we pay for something. It's about a much wider aspect than that.
Thank you so much for answering the questions and for being with us today, and hopefully see you soon. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for your questions, Ava. Thanks very much to all of you for listening to me. As a final message, I'd like you to take away sustainability should not cost you more, but bad procurement probably will. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you again in the near future.